everybody. Welcome to Debug This Podcast, where we talk about life as a software engineer, more about the life, less about the code, but not really, because we do talk about some code sometimes. Sometimes. Today, you're not seeing double. We have Eddie SanMarco here, right? To my left, you guys know him. And we have Jason SanMarco, his brother, on the other side. What's up, Jason?
How's it going, guys?
It's going great, man. Jason is a senior level UX consultant, and he's going to talk a little bit about the 4Ds of design. He's going to talk a little bit about visual design versus UX. So, hey, Jason, would you be able to give us a little bit about your background and how you got to your level right now?
Yeah, not a problem. So I started around 2004, which is sort of the booming time for the market. So I got in at a pretty good period. And at first, I actually wasn't interested in design or UX at all. I had a sort of full service company, and that's sort of what I did before all this. And
full service company?
Yeah, so I cleaned pools. I had my own business, and it was good. And then I needed to sort of branch into the digital market. And as soon as I was introduced to sort of this industry and that scene, I said, "This is what I want," and I sort of got rid of my business, sold all my contacts, and jumped right in. So I'm a little different than most people. I didn't go to school for this. I'm self-taught, so it took a little bit longer than someone who went to college that got an art degree or an engineering degree.
So is this something that like you just have, or is it something that is learnable?
You mean like a design eye?
Yeah. Like, did you have it already, and then you had to refine it?
I would say that this particular skill set is definitely learnable. I would say that some people might have a different eye for layout or for color, but I mean, everything that I do, you can absolutely learn.
Okay.
That's actually a really good thing, because I think a lot of people, they want to get into the design world and they'll say, well, I can't draw, or I'm not a creative person. And so what you're saying here is that all the things that you can do to be successful in your career is a learned skill.
Absolutely. I mean, and there are aspects to visual design or graphic design that take the sort of more illustrative or art role. But for everything that involves for UX, it's definitely not, hey, you need a skill in illustration to sort of do this. This is you need to learn the steps and the processes and repeat those over and over to get to a skill set that is required to sort of build apps and software and things like that.
So if you were to talk to somebody who's super new in the design world, whether it's UX, whether it's visual design, they're just like, hey, I want to break into the industry today versus maybe 10 years ago or 12 years ago when you really got your feet wet into this industry.
Your feet wet after the pool service.
Yeah, after the pool service. So if you were going to talk to somebody who was like really new in today's age, what would you tell them as like maybe give them like 3 good points of, hey, this is what you should be learning, or just maybe focus your efforts on these types of industry trends or whatever.
Sure. Okay, so it would depend on which sort of avenue you're going for, but let's just stick with sort of web app design or mobile application design. So we'll stick with that avenue. If you're looking to get into that field and you're brand new, you know nothing, the first thing is I would always recommend people watch videos online like this podcast or other videos that talk about the expectations, because there is you're welcome. There's a lot to know about what you're getting into, right? So that's step 1. Step 2 is, once they've gotten, their feet wet, so to say, a little bit, is to join workshops in their area. There's a lot of different companies that hold sort of UX meetups or workshops. Even if you don't know that much, you can go and you can learn quite a bit about expectations or different processes or what to know. The company that I work, we host UX meetups every month. So the second Tuesday of every month we host meetup, and it's welcome to anyone who wants to join, even if they're not in a UX field. So and then I would say the third thing is start to learn about the different standard design patterns, right? So you've got Android and iOS, they have their own. Android is a material-based design. design pattern. iOS is a human interface. Microsoft has their own. And that translates more, just not even just for mobile, but it translates to web as well. And to get sort of the baseline of what that design pattern would look like, that would be a good starting point, because those design elements are being utilized over and over again.
So I'm curious, and this may be just a little sidestep for now, but what is your thoughts on material design, and is that going to be do you think that that's going to be the trend moving forward for a while, or do you think that because you just kind of talked about kind of 3 separate design styles that are very similar in nature, but also have major different aspects of how they approach UX. So do you feel like material design is still the industry leader in design concepts, and do you think that that's going to stay around for a long time?
So what I'll say about that is, I think that material design, at least the UI structure that Google's produced, is one of the most thought out design structures. It is so in depth that it goes into very specific and intricate ways of implementing each pattern or element. So it's one of the most robust, which is why I think that it is the industry standard now. They've put a lot of money and a lot of time into constructing the guide itself. That's why it is the industry standard, at least for Android and for most web applications.
Right.
Okay. That being said, I think that it's not necessarily a standard that you say we have to use this specific structure because that is what the standard is. Right. I would say that anytime you're building a web app or an intranet or a mobile application, somebody who is in charge of creating the assets needs to have maybe not as robust as material, but needs to have a very solid and structured style guide, so that, not only does it make you guys, your developers' lives a lot easier, but it makes the designer's life easier, because you're not designing for every functionality. So I would say
that, in terms of the way we do things, having a design guide, we do have one. It's not as robust as what I think you're describing right now, Jason, but just at least having that allows us to really be cowboys at sometimes and build some really interesting portions of our application that we mainly focus on in our regular day-to-day jobs, without having to, even though we would like to have more designs, it's not a requirement. We can iterate over what we've done before and kind of build some cool stuff with having it. So definitely agree with you that style guides are hugely important for programmers.
And I've seen the materialize like the Google documentation.
Yeah.
And that thing is pretty technical, man. It is in depth. Like it tells you like how far the shadows are, and
it reads like a technical document.
It really does.
You know what I mean? Even though that it's not, it definitely reads as such, which is interesting because it's about design, right?
Yeah.
And I think Jason, we could probably get in more depth of the strategy behind that, but do you feel like design is kind of going more into a technical box in regards to how they're developing out these new concepts?
Well, I think it needs to, so you have this sort of people on the ground who are doing the actual visual designing. But I think that when you step, and maybe this is a good segue into UX versus visual design, but when you step out of
it's perfect.
When you step out of the visual design aspect and you're moving into a sort of more encompassed UX process, which is what everyone will eventually, if you're a designer now, you will eventually get to this point. Then you have to sort of work hand in hand with the developers, because you're creating such complex systems that you need to know how things are functioning, and whether or not the time the development takes to get these different features in is worth the cost of the actual usability of it.
So maybe you can touch on like the differences between like visual design and UX design. I think that a lot of people might be interested in that, so that they can kind of see the two different avenues that they can go into in their career, because they are two separate things, right?
Yes and no. So visual design is part of a UX process, right? It's one part of it. I would say that most people that start to do what I do is going to start in that sort of visual design realm. So you're in the you're sort of on the ground level. You're creating these UI elements, and you're being directed by a creative director or a lead UX person, right? To say, we need these specific elements. We need you to create them so that we can integrate into our systems.
Right.
So that is the visual design part of you're creating graphical assets for the developers to use based on a specific requirement that is given to you. When you get into the UX realm, that is still part of, let's say, my job, right? I'm still doing that part of it.
Mm-hmm.
But the difference is that now you're looking at, why am I creating these specific elements? How does it fit in with the flow of the application or the software that we're building? And does it enhance a user experience or provide a solution for a gap that we're solving? So there is a much larger process outside of the visual design once you step just above that level.
How does one get that information? So how do you know if it's gonna have value to what you're trying to do?
So research, right? So within the process, you're getting requirements, and this is part of the 40, which we can talk about in a little bit. But you're validating the sort of whys and the how is this going to increase value by doing gaps analysis reports, doing some sort of competitive analysis,
Mm-hmm. Wow.
and actually doing the testing. So you can spend a bit of time putting together different assets, and then my preferred policy is to do testing quickly and fail as fast as you can, because if you fail quickly, then okay, I can go back. I didn't spend 6 months building this thing. It didn't work out.
Right.
I spent 3 weeks, and now this one thing that we're testing, that didn't work. So we're going to go do something different. And so getting those fail fast testing, the test evaluations quickly, we can then validate what we're building. So
it sounds very technical, like really, really technical. I mean, it almost sounds like the relationship we have with our engineers and architects.
Yeah.
It's almost like they lay out where we're going with the whole architecture of the software, and then you have your UI designer, which is pretty much the programmer. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, this is what you guys are going to code, and the programmer has some freedoms too, but they're kind of contained in this decision that the architect made.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And this is sounding like really, really technical. I didn't realize how technical this was.
So you're pretty much the architect of the design world.
Well, yeah, I mean that's one part of it. So one part of my job is information architecture.
Right.
So I'm taking the requirements and what the user base is looking for, what the client wants, and I'm structuring that into a very tangible app map or site map, creating wireframes, and then getting to the visual design part from there, based off of a lot of research and ideation and process.
So Jace, if someone wants to stay up on design trends, I mean, we as programmers have a very specific set of sites that we go to make sure that we stay up on trends, and people we follow and on Twitter and stuff. If a designer wanted to come in and say, well, okay, where do I go to get inspiration, or where do I go to make sure I keep up on the latest trends? Like, where would they go for that?
So for visual design specifically, I use, as weird as it sounds, Pinterest, Dribbble, or Behance. The issue with that is that the people that are posting their own visual designs on that platform are trying to showcase a design prowess. So they're trying to go a little bit over the top when it comes to what they're showcasing people. I mean, you might see some things that are very interesting, very well designed out. They may not be as functional when you actually get it into a user setting. But
Gotcha.
If you're looking for inspiration, you can take those elements and shape them into something that would work based on the sort of acceptance criteria of what you're supposed to be building.
Gotcha.
Okay, so it's kind of like if we were to go to Stack Overflow and we see a solution to our problem, we might have to tailor it a little bit to our own app. You know what I mean?
Right.
In the right context. We're like, oh, okay, we don't need all that, but
Yeah.
maybe I could use a little part of it or something.
Yeah, like
You know
this
what I mean?
portion right here works from what we're trying to do functionally, but we're gonna ditch everything else.
Yeah,
Or we're gonna
this
expand upon this right here. We're gonna take what we need,
Yeah.
expand upon that core.
Or it might put you on the right path. You're like,
Right.
oh, okay, I see it. Maybe I could do it that way.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Okay.
Right, and then also, like, if you take elements from those very over the top designs, and let's say you say, I'm going to try to recreate this to see if I have the skill set. What you're doing is you're creating a foundation for a new set of design elements that you could create in the future based off of what you're practicing on. So it's not just like, I'm going to take these and maybe expand on it, which is absolutely a part of it, right?
Right.
But it's also, I'm now training myself to design differently so that I can use those skill sets in a future design that may call for something like this.
So what are some principles that you go by? Because as developers and software engineers, we definitely have design patterns and different principles that we always sort of live by, like don't repeat yourself.
Yeah.
Functions should be like small. So we have like these I guess like rules that we live by when we code,
Like
to make
coding
sure
standards.
Coding standards, right? Is there what are some, like, I guess, standards that you go by when you're designing something or you're approaching a certain problem?
Well, there are definitely heuristic rules that we're supposed to follow, right? When you're doing UX specifically and you're coming up with solutions. So like visibility and system status, right? So you should always keep your users informed about what's going on, and you have to do that through like appropriate feedback within a very reasonable amount of time, right? So that would be one heuristic rule. Or recognition rather than recall. So what you're doing is minimizing users' memory load. So you're creating objects and things that are actually visible that they can see, and you're getting them to recognize specific elements rather than I'm having to recall this feature over and over again. Like, for example, the fab control in Gmail. You know exactly what it does because you're recognizing the action that you've taken over and over again, rather than having to remember or recall what that element does and say, well, I don't really know what this does. I'm going to tap it. Now I know what it does, right?
Oh,
we
wow,
want to
okay.
we want to not make sure that doesn't happen. We want to say we're going to make elements that are recognizable that the user can repeat, rather than having to remember what these features do.
And so recognizable in that if you were to change the UI and not label what that functionality would be, they would still recognize it as something that they already know what to do with, right?
Absolutely. So like if you like, for example, again, if you do the fab control in Gmail, it doesn't have a label. You go in, you know exactly what it does, and you can use that control in almost any platform, and users will know exactly what it's for, right? So it's for additional actions or for additional interior navigation.
Oh wow! So it's less so about the very specific application that you're in, but that is so recognizable that you can really use it in any application. And
right,
if you do it in a similar way, people would automatically recognize it and go, "I know what to do."
Okay, so that's why you always see different design patterns being, I don't want to say copied, but maybe mimicked.
Yeah.
Right, because what we have now, because everyone is so ingrained into their phones and apps and software, is you have a sort of a cultural recognition of action. So you have elements that people see on an everyday basis with it when they're using their devices, that they know exactly what it does. So and what you're doing is you're minimizing your effort to create elements and sort of actionable features that now people have to learn. They already know certain sort of activities and gestures that they're using. You know, anybody who is interested in learning about those principles, there is a billion different articles written, a lot of books written on heuristic rules. They're out there. You just gotta type in, heuristic rules in UX and you can pick it up.
So the fact that there are billions is, I think, the problem. Is what are some ones that you what are some ones that you like, or that you would point somebody to, like, this is de facto like the best one?
You can look at the Nielsen Norman Group. So they're very established as far as what the sort of structure of heuristic rules are. Let me see. I can probably give you guys some information. You can provide this in your guys' videos and put the links on to different sites that people can use and go to. But the Nielsen Norman Group is very structured.
That'd be great. We've been kind of teasing these 4 Ds of UX, right? Is that the label for it? The 4 Ds of UX?
I call it the 4D process, right? So like you could call it a few different things, but it is a very structured process.
We've been teasing it a little bit, so maybe you can go in depth to see like because I want to know what it is too.
Yeah,
you've been talking to me about it for a couple of days, and I didn't let you say anything until now because I wanted to be surprised.
Wait till the interview and tell me.
Yeah.
Okay. So it is a sort of 4-pillar process for user experience, and some people, they add a few steps or take some away depending on how technical you want to be, but this is sort of what I use on a daily basis. And the 4 Ds translate to discovery, define, design, and deliver. So those are the 4 main steps of my UX process. So in the first pillar is discovery. So that is you're determining some of the requirements from your client. You're discovering what the pain points are. You're doing some sort of requirements gathering from the client themselves. So you would normally do this, let's say if you're in an agile process in like a sprint zero, and you're always doing these processes too. And I'll touch on that in a little bit, but so you're doing all of the discovery process of the project. Then when you've got enough information, you're now doing into a defined stage, and that would be I'm doing user interviews. I'm getting all of the information from discovery, and I'm putting that into a journey map or an app map, and I'm structuring all of the information. You might jump back into the discovery phase a little bit in define. If you
after you learn a few things, maybe you made the wrong guess or something like that,
or you need to get more information. Yeah, you're refining your information. Oh, I don't know about this particular piece of information. Let me do that, and I'll bring it in here. So you're defining everything that you've gathered in your discovery phase, and you might build some really basic wireframe templates right out of this. Once you get through that, you're going into the design phase, and it's exactly what it sounds like. I'm taking all of my defined information, and I'm doing maybe more in-depth wireframing, maybe some wireframe prototyping, so I can test things.
So this and then I'm doing the high-res portion of the Ds, of the 4 Ds. This is just like wireframing and stuff.
Well, it's also that too.
Okay.
So you might do, depending on how in depth you went to your original wireframes and original prototyping. If you need to do additional user testing, you could do that in this phase as well. And then you're also doing the high definition visual designs for this.
And I guess like if you're already in this process, let's say you've already built portions of your app, you should have somewhat of a design style or design guide to go with it. So, you could potentially use this 4D process in smaller subsets of the application that you're building, and then just reference your style guide with wireframes. Is that kind of like how you would streamline that process on things that are kind of already established, or?
Right. So this process is ever ongoing. It's more of a circular process, right? So and I'll tell you how it ties into and how it circles back around once we get through the final phase.
Cool.
So you're doing your high res visual designs. You're doing your ideations during this period. You might do demos to your PO or the clients themselves. And then once everything is approved, you move on to a delivery phase. And what this is I'm delivering prototypes and possibly a small code base to the actual developers with a style guide, so they can take that and then build. And that doesn't mean that my job's done, because as a UX person, you're supposed to work with the developers to make sure that they are understanding the actions and features as you've designed them and as you've laid them out, and assisting them in implementation. So, it's not, hey, I'm giving you this and then I'm done with that piece. You're always ingrained with each department and each level. So how it ties back in. So once you've delivered and that that particular piece of design has been coded and then, let's say, pushed out to a live or a production level app or software,
like a demo.
You're now doing a new discovery based off of what you learned throughout the previous process. So now now I have a new set of requirements. How does the previous build sort of instruct me on my new process? So it's just a whole ingrained circular system. It's really fascinating.
It sounds really interesting, actually.
Yeah, it does. I don't think I've ever really heard it from the side of the UX designer.
You know what? That's why I really love these interviews, because we get to learn perspectives that we've never even thought about.
Yeah, we just see our side.
Yeah, and then you and I have talked about something this kind of stuff, but in the past, Jace, but never really this in depth. And I had no idea that it was this technical.
Yeah, I mean, when we get to the sort of UX process level of things, to me it almost feels like it's not a designer and a developer. It is a cohesive team,
right?
Because I need to make sure, let's say we're working together on a project, I need to make sure that you understand the sort of actions and features that the users are taking, and you need me to understand if there's a limitation on the sort of framework that you're using, or what is the time it takes to develop this particular feature, as opposed to, can we sort of streamline this, slim this down so that we can make sure that there is an ROI on what we're building. So it definitely is a full encompassed UX team.
Okay. So when you come up with a strategy, you know that there may be changes. And how often does it change from like what you first created and the end product?
Yeah, it changes all the time. So we might have started with something and we built out a feature, and we may test it, and then that comes back and the users may not like this particular way that it functions. So now we have to switch the flow, or we have to move elements around the page to make sure that we're not breaking any heuristic rules. So it can change quite a bit, or we can put it out and they say, everything's great. And if that happens, it always makes me nervous because I'm like, no, it definitely, there's definitely going to be some changes.
It's a little too good.
Yeah. Like, I know I'm good, but I don't know I'm that good.
So I was curious about the interviews. How does these interviews take place? Like, is it a phone call? Is it like a focus group?
Yeah, it could be all of those things. So like normally I will do either phone interviews and ask very specific questions. I've also gone to job sites or done ride-alongs with different people. Like if I need to build, like for example, I built a transportation application in the past for people who are shipping different products, and did ride-alongs with the drivers and watch their day-to-day tasks to say, if what are we building here, and if we build something, will it make their life easier, or will it make their experience and their job faster and more efficient?
Because you don't want to build things that don't make sense. You want to build things that make sense for what you're trying to accomplish.
You can't just build it all willy-nilly.
So it could be phone interviews or in-person focus groups. I tend to like the one-on-one as opposed to the focus group a little bit better, because there's a range of opinions when you're getting 15 people into one place.
Mm-hmm. Design by committee, you don't want to get too in the weeds with that.
Yeah. You get a big throw up of information, and it's hard to sift through. But the individuals is definitely a good start, at least.
The reason I love these interviews also is like I always get a new respect for whoever we're interviewing in that field.
Yeah.
Because I know there's a running joke in the office. We're like, oh, you're just a UX designer, and we don't mean it, but we're just being funny, and we're just like, you just design stuff like that's.
Yeah.
That's
you
so
just
easy.
draw pictures all day, right?
Yeah. So, but hearing all this, I mean, it sounds like it's super in depth, and I'm pretty sure this can like haunt you on the weekends, right? I'm pretty sure you're always thinking about it, and there's probably things always running in your mind, like trying new things, or did I make a right decision for this? Kind of like how we do with code.
Yeah, it's definitely stressful, because and not to say anything about the developers, because there is a different level of skill and aspect to it. But when it comes to sort of creating and being a part of the UX field, the reason why it's a little bit more, at least for me, to be a little bit more stressful is because what you're doing is you're creating interpersonal sort of communications between software and user, and what you have to make sure that you're sort of designing and creating for is, how is this going to affect them personally as far as their experience and mental state when it comes to the device that they're using.
So you're really designing for people's emotions.
Absolutely.
Which is hard.
Yeah. Computers are easy.
Yeah.
Humans are hard.
Yeah, computers are like, we give them a really specific set of instructions, and they do those things.
And the problem with computers is they do what you tell them to do. That's the problem with computers.
Yeah.
With humans, man, you just never know. Again, we just got a whole new respect for UX designers and the UX field. Even UI design. I mean, I think I've never known like how deep this is, and it's very technical. Like I've seen some of those technical stuff, and I was just like, I turned away. I was just like, whatever. But now I see this process is just like really, 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 really hard and in depth.
So if there was something that you want to like kind of convey to designers, like before we just wrap up here, what would you say is like a super important thing that they should be aware of when they're getting into this field, or if they're already in and they're trying to progress in their career, or make the switch from straight visual design into more of like a UX research role or UX consultant role?
Sure. So what I would say is, for those people watching this video and in whatever level designer they are now, not to be intimidated by all of this information, because you're already doing it. So everybody is doing this process when they're living their day-to-day. So like, for example, if you're at work and you're going through an office to another office, and you go to grab the handle of a door, and it's this big pull here, and you go to pull it, and it says push right on the door. That's that's a bad UX process.
I
And you recognize that.
like, okay, if you want to push, it should be like flat. You know what I mean? So I know to push.
Yep.
If,
Right.
if you want me to pull, then have the handle.
You just did a recognition rather than recall UX a heuristic role right there.
Oh, cool,
So-
man. I must have been a UX designer, man.
You were
Yes.
just too good, Kevia.
I know.
Yeah. So I mean, all this stuff does sound really technical, but once you start to understand the processes and stuff, it almost feels like I'm doing this on a regular basis when I make decisions in my own life. So the first thing would be just don't be intimidated. It does make sense when you start to get more and more in depth. The next thing I would say is, this industry is really cutthroat. So, just be prepared to kind of, put yourself out there and work real hard, but it is definitely worth it. If you can wake up and say, I'm not going to my job, you can say, I'm feeling good about my career and I'm actually excited to work on these things that I'm doing. That's sort of the payoff at the end. So just keep going through. There's a lot of resources, in almost every city. You're going to find, people that are doing this and are more than happy to assist. So just, kind of just keep pushing through.
And I just want to touch on imposter syndrome. I think we should do a
yes, big
whole
time.
video on soon.
That's a good
because
idea, yeah.
It is important, right?
We'll hit that up.
With developers, I know that there's imposter syndrome because I have it. I know you got it.
Mhm.
And most people do in the developer world. So if you're a developer
Still do. It
watching
never
this,
goes away.
it never goes away. But maybe you can touch on, and I assume that that designers and UX people, they probably also have this. I'm wondering if you feel it in your day-to-day work and what you can kind of tell people to kind of ease them, because I try to talk to junior level to developers about imposter syndrome pretty quickly, because a lot of people don't know, especially when they're just trying to break into the industry. They just have this feeling that they're inadequate, and they don't know how to define it. And so I try to talk to them, even if they don't ask me questions about it. I try to talk to them about it because it is a real
there.
It's a blocker too.
Yeah,
it's a blocker in
yeah.
your life. So maybe, Jace, could you just take a real quick to touch on that and to kind of give people who are more creative people some advice on how to keep going, how to make sure that they can push themselves further.
Yeah, I mean, what I'll say is I've been doing this 14 years, and I also suffer from imposter syndrome. But the thing is that I had no idea what this was until about 6 months ago. Just to being completely honest. Yeah,
Really?
I was sort of internalizing
You
all
just got
this.
diagnosed with it like 6 months ago.
Yeah.
Like you have imposter syndrome. this
Yeah,
whole
so
time.
I heard about this and I'm like, this is exactly what I've been experiencing, and I sort of internalized it. And so I will very quickly say is that a lot of people, especially in this industry, suffer because you're working on $1 million, $5 million, $10 million projects. You're like, why am I the one that is sort of tasked to do this?
That might support like 1 million people.
Yeah.
Right. And so what I would say is this is absolutely not a thing that you're dealing with by yourself. A lot of people sort of internalize and struggle with this. And I mean, even me, for as long as I've been doing this, but recognizing that this is a thing that people deal with definitely helped, right? So now I understand what it is, and I can sort of say, why am I feeling like this? It's because, it's because of this, and other people are also experiencing this. So this is not a thing that I'm dealing with on my own.
I actually think imposter syndrome could be like a good signal, actually, because if you don't have it, that means you're probably at the same level. You're not doing something more difficult. You're in the same level and you're doing something easy. You know what I mean?
And you may not recognize the difficulty of the tasks that you're performing. So you're just like, oh, I'm the best.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You don't want to be like that. Like, to me, and you might have a good point. It's like, now that I think about it in that perspective, imposter syndrome, at least for my own stuff, you could take that and say, okay, well, I know that I'm not where I want to be, so let's push forward and get to that spot.
Yeah,
right.
Jason's done it for 14 years.
Yeah.
But that means he's been leveling up. So he's doing something harder and harder and harder.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So if that imposter syndrome is not there, then you're not doing something right. That's a good topic. We're gonna do that next time. I like that one.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
And just to pile on just one more time on that is to say that if you're feeling that way, it's probably because you become comfortable in what you're doing, and that's not to say that it's a bad thing. To say, like, I'm very comfortable where I'm at, so now I don't feel that way. Maybe I need to do something different. If you're okay with what you're doing, I say stick with it. But if you're feeling it, it's because of what Kevia and what Eddie is saying is that you're now starting to push yourself outside of what your normalcy is, and you're feeling that pressure. So don't feel like you're alone.
Jason, if somebody wants to reach out to you and get a hold of you, how could they do that?
Well, they can reach me at my email address. I'm sure you guys can probably give them in the descriptions. My contact information. You can find me on Behance at behance.net/jdcon. So that's some of my work is up there, and you can reach me directly.
Awesome. Well, Jason, we really appreciate you coming on and taking the time to talk with us today. It was a really interesting conversation, and I'd like to get you in studio.
That'd be awesome.
One of these weeks, so that we can all have a really in-depth conversation, maybe a longer conversation.
Yeah. Shooting live.
Do it live
on location.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it'd be fun.
Yeah, I think it would be awesome. So I just want to say I appreciate it. All right. Well, that's it for the Debug This podcast for this week. Make sure you check out our video next time. I think it's going to be not the.
It's going to be the hot seat.
The hot seat.
Yeah,
okay.
It's going to be the hot seat. It's going to be really exciting. This is so yeah, we have a lot of new bits that we're going to be doing here coming up. So
I think it's going to be fun.
Yeah, look out for that.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I'm Eddie SanMarco. This is Kevia Cloud. Jason SanMarco on the phone. Thanks for coming in. And
Happy Labor Day.
Happy Labor Day. And we'll see you guys in the next
All right.
video. Later.